Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than the LG G7 and see how it holds up in 2021. Now, starting off, the price tag. This device definitely isn't, a super expensive device anymore like it kind of was when it first came out in 2018. You can pick up this thing for around $100 in a lot of places, so find the cheapest ones on Amazon, as well as some other devices that I would recommend this year down in the description below. You can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the front of the LG G7, this thing does still have that 6.1 inch IPS panel on the front. What's funny is this is kind of that resolution that Apple has kind of stuck with, that 6.1 inch panel on all the iPhone XR, iPhone 11, and now for their iPhone 12s and 12 Pros, we have that same video or that same size resolution for the panel, and I think that's pretty good. This was a 1440p panel as well, and even though it did have a little bit of a notch at that time, and it may have not been the craziest best OLED display or anything, it's still a really high resolution IPS panel. You still have the notch and a little bit of bezel at the bottom, but it really doesn't look that bad, and I think most people will probably end up agreeing with that stance. Now, you still have IP certification on this thing too, which is great, so if you spill a little bit of water on it, theoretically you should be okay, which is always good to see. You have USB Type-C on the bottom as well, which is great, but on top of that, you also have that microSD card slot, and again, this is always one of my favorite things to see on a device. Whenever you have expandable storage on a device even like this, you are setting yourself up for many years of just support in pretty much every single dimension. So in this case, you're going to be set for a very long time in terms of storage. So that in and of itself is really huge and just one of my favorite things about this device. Now, on the back, you do have a glass back, which is really cool. So again, this is another area where you're really going to be set at. The body of this thing feels extremely good for sure, and you do have that fingerprint sensor on the back and that dual camera setup as well. Now, I'll hit on those in a second, but for sure, the outside body of this thing is seriously one of my favorite things about it. You also have wireless charging on this device too, so you can easily go ahead and charge this thing up wirelessly, which is a really cool thing. And the body, compared to this body to like other phones that I've came across, it definitely is really good. And for 2018, this thing came out in May, that's a really decent, body feeling to it. And compared to something like the Galaxy S21 we have nowadays, this one definitely feels better in my opinion. So in terms of the body, the LG G7 completely holds up in my opinion. Now, moving on to the camera side of things, like I said before, the G7 had a dual camera setup on the back. It had a 16 megapixel standard lens, which I think is kind of across the board pretty much standard, if you will. And it has a 16 megapixel ultra wide sensor. Now, those are actually pretty decent lenses to have. Like I stated, I'm glad they put an ultra wide sensor here and not a telephoto lens, but it would have been cool had this thing had a triple camera setup. But I do think for the ultra wide sensor is totally okay with no telephoto lens or anything. Now, I will tell you one thing about LG, their cameras were actually always pretty good for the most part. You had the ability of shooting 4K at 60 on this lens, which is really good. At that time, the iPhone XS wasn't out, so even no iPhones at this point could do 4K at 60. So this was even 4K at 60 before the iPhones. And I think this specific device has a really good quality when it comes down to the camera lens on the back. I think it was actually a pretty decent lens for the most part. There really isn't too much to complain about. And I think LG just does a really bad job at, the UIs of their cameras. I feel like they just throw in just a bunch of random weird looking things, and it isn't the most visual appealing thing either. So that's another pretty big downside of this specific device. You can have the best lenses in the world, but if you have a really weird and just strange looking UI on it, it's not really going to be a good little mixture you're going to have. So again, that in and of itself is something that I'm not really super happy about, but the front camera, an 8 megapixel wide angle lens, and here you can only do 1080p at 60, but to keep that in perspective, this thing, like I said, came out in 2018. The iPhone XS that came out later on in that year could also only do 1080p at 60, so not really that big of a deal here either. I think it's totally understandable. So in terms of the camera, I would probably end up telling you that I think it's a solid camera for a 2018 phone. I think having the 4K at 60 on the back and even 1080p at 60 on the front isn't that bad, but you are kind of succumbed to the lack of additional sensors on the back, so that dual camera setup is good. If it had a couple extra sensors, that would have been even better, but also the lack of 4K on the front too, that is another downside of this thing, but I do think it's okay and it's totally understandable in this day and age. So in terms of the camera standpoint, that really pretty much covers it up. Now, hitting on, I think, probably two of the worst things about this device, which is the software and also the battery life. So first of all, the software, this thing started off with Android Oreo. It was upgradable to Android 10, which I think is great. Having, a kind of long-term support on a device like this is awesome, and I love seeing that. But the problem is that because it's only stopped at Android 10, I even heard of some versions of this device not even getting Android 10, which that is a whole other story in and of itself. But the main problem here is that the LG G7 is kind of outdated right now. It's not getting any more software support. You're pretty much already outdated. There's no point in even getting this phone because by the time you get it, it's going to be even more outdated. And in fact, the day I'm filming this audio, recording this audio, I already have the Android 12 developer beta on my Pixel 5 and I've already made a video about it by now. So it's pretty insane. I mean, you're already outdated in that standpoint. So that's another kind of huge area I would look at. Getting something that even like the Pixel that came out in 2018, like the Pixel 3, is going to get you a much better experience in terms of software for around the same price, if not cheaper, than the G7. But it's weird though, because the G7 is such a good feeling phone and it has such a kind of still decent looking screen. So it's kind of misleading in a way, because I just feel like if these manufacturers take their software seriously, I feel like more people would end up using their phones and for a much longer duration of time. I don't feel like a lot of people use LG phones anymore unless they're like somehow associated with Pixels or Nexus devices or iPhone panels or whatever the case is. Now the battery size is also only 3000 mAh. Now compare that to basically all the other phones that came out nowadays. It's a pretty small size battery. It's kind of like Apple in a way, where they just keep kind of a sub 3000 mAh battery device on these type of sized phones, and it's just strange to me. I'll never really understand it. So this is another case in point of that. So in this case, you're not really going to be getting that great battery life either. So you're getting kind of strange battery size and also, not that great software. You're not really going to be getting that great of an experience on this thing when it comes down to these two things, in my opinion. And because it's already a couple years old, it's probably degraded a little bit in the battery standpoint too. So keep that in mind. But that's really the main two disadvantages of picking up the LG G7 in 2021. Now, talking about the performance and ending it off here, this thing did have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chipset, an octa-core CPU, and two different models of this device. So the base model had 4GB of RAM, and the top tier model had 6GB of RAM. And I actually do think the performance is actually pretty decent still on this device. I think one of the downsides of this phone though is because of the software. It's so clunky and has so many weird background processes in the background of it, and it's not really that stock. So you're already kind of stuck in somewhat of like a one UI bubble of just kind of getting this like strange LG UI on it, and I'm not really a huge fan of it. But I will tell you the performance is still actually pretty decent because of the amount of RAM that you're getting on this thing. I'm glad it didn't have like 3 gigs or something, and you can even max out this thing at 6 gigs of RAM for that top tier option, and I think that is actually a really decent option to top out at. So I think for sure you're getting a solid experience when it comes down to the whole entire, RAM and performance and all that. If you're doing heavier intensive things, this device is easily going to be able to handle it too. So you're not really going to experience too many problems in that standpoint. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not. But you're going to be getting some solid performance for almost a 3-year-old phone for sure. So in terms of that, I'll probably say the performance is probably a thumbs up for me. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and pick up an LG G7 in 2021? Well, this is what I'll tell you. I think there are still so many pros of this phone, but the cons kind of outweigh the pros in terms of the importance of it. So first of all, the body of this phone is still top tier. You're still getting a pretty decent, screen on this thing. The notch really isn't even that big of a deal to me, and you're still getting a fingerprint sensor on this thing somehow in the back, which I'm still okay with. USB Type-C on this thing, micro SD card slot. That is a humongously important feature. And as I stated before, that is always something I look out for in a device, and this device has it. So that is just another thumbs up for me in my standpoint. The back camera of this thing gets a thumbs up for me there too. This is a solid back camera. It's not outdated. It's not ugly. It's none of those things. So you're getting still a very solid camera on this thing, which again, that in and of itself is a thumbs up for me. And the performance really isn't even that bad. It's still actually a pretty decent performing device in my opinion. But there are a couple of downsides, which I've mentioned before. The software, I'm not really a huge fan of. I don't really like this software. Maybe you can custom monitor, something I haven't been able to custom on any of my LG devices in a very long time. But this device could have been better had it had stock versions of Android, or had it had some sort of, just a little bit longer of, software support. I feel like that would have been a little bit of an improvement in the software lifecycle. But also the battery life and the size isn't really that big in this day and age. So even if you can get over the software, the battery size and the battery life is another obstacle you're going to kind of have to jump over. So that's another somewhat minor thing to keep in mind. And those are really the main things. I'm glad this thing has IP certification. I'm glad this thing looks the way it does. And I'm glad it has a micro SD card slot support. But I think at the end of the day, picking up a device like this, you're probably going to end up probably, not enjoying it as much as you would if you picked up something like a Pixel 4a, for example, or maybe even like a Samsung Galaxy S10. Those things are a little bit more expensive, but those devices are way more. The Galaxy S10 being a way better device in my opinion than really the LG G7 or even the Pixel 4a for now. So that really pretty much covers it up. Like I stated, if you want to pick up those phones, links will be down in the description. You can pick them up from there and help support the channel at the same time. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.